Thank you, Chairman. Last October, I submitted comments along with several colleagues to EPA and DOT chronicling the fossil fuel industry's efforts to hijack the fuel standards rulemaking, and I have appended those lengthy comments to my testimony. First, the background. In the last administration, the auto industry agreed to greenhouse gas standards for model years 2017 through 2005 in an agreement with the state of California and the federal government. The standards would cut carbon pollution from cars and light trucks in half by 2025, saving American families more than $1.7 trillion or $8,000 per car by model year 2025. Then President Trump took office. The auto industry sought to revisit the standards, apparently for mostly technical changes. They deny arguing for a freeze or for outright repeal or against the California standards. But someone else was watching. While the fuel economy standards would have little effect on the number of cars sold, they would considerably affect the amount of gasoline sold. That $1.7 trillion saved by consumers is lost oil industry revenue. So the oil industry activated the web of front groups and trade associations that it uses to block climate action. Trade associations like the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, AFPM, which big oil pays to do its political dirty work, anodyne-sounding front groups like Freedom Works, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and Americans for Tax Reform, that masquerade as public interest groups but serve as mouthpieces for the fossil fuel industry. To maintain the masquerade, these groups don't disclose their funders, but all are tied in various ways into the network run by fossil fuel interests with a $1 trillion incentive to undo the fuel efficiency standards. In March 2018, 11 front groups wrote to then EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, urging him to revoke the California waiver. We found that the 11 groups behind the March letter had received a minimum of $49 million from fossil fuel interests. I stress minimum, since these groups don't disclose their funders. The total is likely far, far higher. A month later, in April 2018, a dozen front groups wrote to Pruitt and Secretary of Transportation Chow, thanking them for proposing to undo the standards and urging them to go as far as possible. The 12 groups behind the April letter had received a minimum of $196 million in funding from fossil fuel interests. Then in May 2018, senior executives from 2 front groups wrote to President Trump urging him to roll back the standards and revoke the waiver. The 2 groups behind the May letter had received a minimum of $7.7 million from fossil fuel interests. The front groups did not limit their effort to letters. Americans for Prosperity, a front group at the heart of the Coke industry's political network, launched a national public campaign opposing the fuel economy standards. Americans for Prosperity also does not disclose its donors, but the Cokes are fossil fuel billionaires. Oil Industry Trade Association, AFPM, sponsored a separate campaign on Facebook against the fuel economy standards, and oil companies themselves quietly went to work. Disclosure reports for 2017 and 18 reveal that Marathon Petroleum, the largest U.S. oil refiner, Valero, the second largest, and Andeavor, the 5th largest, all lobbied on the standards, as did Coke companies and AFPM. Marathon Petroleum pressed particularly hard. We were able to obtain a draft letter to NHTSA Deputy Administrator Heidi King, urging that the standards be weakened. The draft still contained the letter's metadata, which showed it was drafted in April 2018 by a Marathon in-house lobbyist. We compared the Marathon lobbyist draft to 3 strikingly similar letters sent to the Deputy Administrator by House members. Applying plagiarism software to their letters revealed that, respectively, 37%, 40%, and 80% of the letters from the Indiana, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania delegations tracked the Marathon lobbyists' draft. And my office now has evidence that AFPM pursued a similar strategy, planting arguments with Republican governors. More important, of course, is what we don't know. We have incomplete information about the funders of these front groups and trade associations. We don't know the substance of communications between those front groups and associations and their fossil fuel funders. We can't yet determine whether oil companies use these tax-exempt front groups to lobby and campaign for this trillion-dollar revenue boost in a way that is a violation of the tax-exempt status of the groups. If evidence showed that the fossil fuel industry used these groups to knowingly lie to the public about the harmful effects of fossil fuels' carbon pollution, it would be appropriate for Congress to uncover and expose that fraud. I hope this committee will initiate a detailed investigation examining this network of front groups and trade associations, determine who funds them, and expose how they coordinate with industry. Representative Henry Waxman spent years investigating how the tobacco industry lied to the public. That work helped put an end to those lies. The public was well served by that effort. Examining dark money funding is an obvious start. There is no legal privilege preventing disclosure of dark money funding. Congress has every right to investigate a scheme to deceive the public. This hearing and the one last week in Representative Raskin's subcommittee lay the predicate. You have a powerful tool at your disposal in the subpoena. Just as Brandeis famously said, sunlight is the best disinfectant, nowhere is there more need for disinfection than in the long and sordid campaign of falsehood the fossil fuel industry has perpetrated. This saga may well not end here. It seems that the auto industry realized how it was being played by Marathon and others, left that fixed game, and worked out a separate agreement with the state of California. This disrupted the Marathon scheme, reportedly angering the administration and even the president. And next thing you know, a truly bizarre letter emerged from the Justice Department raising antitrust concerns against the auto industry for negotiating with California. One basic principle in antitrust law, founded in the Noor-Pennington Doctrine and the Constitution's Petition Clause, is that industries can combine to lobby and negotiate with government. The oil industry combines in one of the most elaborate lobbying operations anywhere to pursue its interests in government. If the oil industry managed to put the Department of Justice up to that letter to the auto industry, it adds irony as well as mystery. Whatever the irony, the mystery of why such a letter was written and who was behind it also lends itself to congressional scrutiny. Mr. Chairman, too much dirty politics is waged with dark money. The secrecy is protected by no privilege, and a little sunlight would be very healthy.
Senator Whitehouse, on the dark money, on the oil industry and the nexus, the very important, really chilling nexus that you've drawn for us today, what do you recommend?
There are two very good avenues for Americans to discover what Paul Harvey used to call the rest of the story, because they're not getting the whole story right now. One avenue is litigation going forward. As the California rule gets litigated, as various other lawsuits proceed, there is something wonderful called discovery, where you get to get the actual documents from the industry. The tobacco industry's campaign of lies fell apart not after they lost the cases in court. They fell apart after discovery was provided. By the time they lost the cases in court, the game was really already over. So discovery, discovery, discovery is one very important vehicle. The second is you all have gavels. You can get these documents yourself. You can request them, and if the companies don't cooperate, you can subpoena them. I'm aware of no legal privilege that protects dark money. It just isn't required to be disclosed. But there are some very, very interesting questions that could be asked about the behind-the-scenes, behind-the-curtains connections that will show America the rest of the story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.